Hi, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate 4.3 demo for the piece I call Drak Attack. So in October, we had a sketch bomb here in Barcelona that was all Halloween themed, of course, because it was October. These were the three themes that we did, and I went with Reimagine a Classic. I wouldn't say that I pushed the reimagining, but what I did push was taking on a fair amount of stuff in a short amount of time. One of the cool things about Sketch Bomb is because it is time boxed, you kind of can understand exactly how long it takes you to do something. Back when I used to run it in San Francisco, I used to do something more along these lines, more of like a sketchy, sort of quickly drawn feel. Yes, these are final inks, but they are not very figured out. They're still rough around the edges. And since you only have 3 hours, what I try to do now at Sketch Bomb, thanks to the iPad and Procreate, is do a full painted thing. Here you can see the sketch phase for this piece took me 5 minutes, and then the part that I did at Sketch Bomb took about 2.5 hours, and then I added an extra hour once I got home just to add a little bit more polish to it. So let's talk about these phases and actually see the thing get created and talk about what it was like to do a painting in the time that we have at Sketch Bomb, which is what I've actually done a few times now if you look at some of my previous Sketch Bomb pieces that I've posted here. So what you first saw was me doing something ridiculous. I don't know what that was, but then I quickly got into doing Dracula. Dracula, I think, needs a way bigger redesign than what I did, but in the time allowed and the limited amount of thinking that I could spend, I think that it was fine. What we got here, though, is me kind of biting off a lot, doing 2 characters interacting where I'm also kind of trying to redesign and bring something interesting to the characters. That's a lot to do in 2.5 hours. So the reason I say 2.5 hours, but it's a 3-hour event, is of course I have to intro the event, I talk to some people, I walk around, I do some things, that type of a thing. At this one though, I had a lot of just sort of head down, crank this thing out. So as you can see here, the really only big redesign we've got to Dracula is like a big mustache. He also has some stylized features, which I guess you could consider interesting, but Dracula's been drawn like 1 billion times, so there's really not much new going on here. The only thing really new was, for me, trying to crank out all of this in a short amount of time. So right here you can see this is the rough sketch, and then I just had to get into painting. What I did for the painting style is what I've been doing a ton. Lately, I should say. All of the work that you've seen me do on the channel over the last long while has been created for a combination of reasons as far as the methods by which I'm creating it. One is getting around layer limitations of Procreate, and 2 is it's faster. And I want to crank out more work, and trying to find ways to work faster and simpler but still produce something that you're proud of is always a valuable endeavor to try and increase your value as an artist as well. Can I do more stuff and deliver it a high quality and still really enjoy it and everything? And that's kind of what the premise was of me more often than not shifting to this method of flats and shadow layers, which is something that, again, I've done almost all my years of doing art digitally, but this has been a real focus on it because by doing just, I guess you could just say, all the things that I've been doing, if you've watched all the other videos, I'm finding something that I'm very happy with. I can put out something really quickly so I don't get bored of doing the actual art, and it still is successful as far as being a piece of art. So why am I mentioning all of that? Because this is the type of scenario where this methodology works very well. I just have to do this rough sketch. I know, since it's my own rough sketch, I know the way the rest of the work has to go. I can then go straight into flats fairly quickly. I'm keeping things a little bit messy, and the fact that I'm doing that on purpose also means that I get to have happy accidents happen, and I'm not being so precious about everything being perfect. And I just kind of bang everything out and go. Flats, AO pass, shadow pass, highlight pass, additional bounce and things like that, and then I'm out. And it's really quick and it's really fun. So to start getting into the actual explanations here, what we've got here now is a rough sketch that has a somewhat interesting stylistic take on Dracula with nothing really new as far as his design. So when I'm picking my colors, I'm also trying to see if I can come up with any colors that are also interesting. Something that I thought would be fun kind of right off the bat was, what if his entire eyes were just blood red? Not red irises, not, I don't know, glowy eyes or regular eyes or whatever. I was just like, let's make them all red, which to be honest is against my usual aesthetic. But I thought, now let's push myself and try to bring something shocking to this. He's got these big orb eyes, and let's just make them red and go from there. And so that was sort of my jumping off point to make this interesting. How do I then continue to make this interesting? Now I already have that big circle in the background, which is hinting at the moon. Oh, actually, I didn't even know I was just about to paint it in. So I painted in right there, probably because I wanted to start getting my bearings around the lighting of all this. And I can use this now for super dramatic lighting. Funny enough, a long time ago, I did a painting of the main character from Crimson, the comic book by Humberto Ramos. And he's holding a girl who has a bite out of her neck, and he's got a big moon behind him. The vibe of that piece is I mean, characters are posed kind of similarly, but the vibe is different. He looks kind of like sad that he's doing it in that piece, and I don't know, you can find it on my DeviantArt, but there's a similar vibe. I mean, when you're drawing a vampire who's just bitten a victim, like, it's kind of similar all the time, but getting that moon back there allows me to give it really dramatic lighting, and that's really what I need here. I mean, it's otherwise a pretty simple piece, so I need that drama to really drive home any type of interest in the image. So I've got him flatted, except for his, like, I don't know, cravat or whatever, and I've got, but I don't have his hand flatted yet, because his hand has to go on top of her face in the layer stack. Same thing with his fingernails. So what I'm doing now is, these are what I would refer to as like incomplete flats. I'm flatting simply for structure so that I can start figuring out where the hell everything is, and then I have to go back in later and make sure that I get the flats where they need to be. So that's why his like cravat isn't done yet. He doesn't have any type of skin variation banged into his skin at all. He doesn't have anything, she doesn't have anything yet. She's going to get her dress, but it's going to be really, really simple. In fact, her dress, if this were in fact sort of like the era Dracula's from, her dress should probably be more complicated, but I wanted to go pretty simplistic with it. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, I'm trying to speak kind of quickly here, and I'm trying to give my thoughts kind of quickly. Two things. I've got this video playing a little faster than I normally do, because I also am trying to, I don't know, transfer to you guys the fact that this was done fast, and I was moving, and I didn't have a lot of time to think. And I think that sometimes that's actually a great idea. I think sometimes when you think, you ruin things, but for the most part, I just want to illustrate that this was me moving super, super fast, just trying to get this whole thing done. So we've got the rough sketch, and the flats, the original flats are almost done, and then we have to go in and start adding in the remaining flat elements so that I make sure I've got everything in there before I start doing the AO. You can see right there, I started doing the AO on the jacket, and then I was like, oh, I don't have other elements, so I will finish the jacket, and then I have to go back in and do everything else. That also means that the jacket is the layer that's the furthest back. So you can see in my rush to get this done, I also have somewhat complex flats scenario going on here. If the jacket's all the way back, that means the hair is technically on top of the jacket, which is just kind of a weird thing to process. There's some amount of the way that you organize your flats that has to be, you know, you sacrifice because it's got to be a certain way with the way you've set up your file, but you want it to be kind of logical for your brain. You want the hair to be all the way in the back because it is kind of all the way in the back. You want his hand to be closest to you because it is closest to you. Luckily, the hand is the closest thing in this, but then there are other things like that hair and that jacket and everything that's all screwy. In fact, his face is on top of the hair, and that means that, like, for instance, I guess you could call it bang, like the part of his hair that sweeps back behind his ear, the part of his hair that's kind of close to us on his forehead side of the head thing, like that's technically behind his face in the layer stack, which sometimes can be a little weird to wrap your head around, especially when you're trying to move quickly and get things done. So it was really kind of like a moment of paint the shadow, go to the layer stack to select my next layer, and then like, oh shit, that's my next layer, and then I have to kind of shift my mindset as to what I'm going to be doing next. So what we're doing here is just the AO pass. We're using a red. This one's definitely a reddish color, which will, some of that will all get changed around when I revisit the piece after my initial 2.5 hours. And we're just trying to get this in. Now it's a little rough. I'm not smoothing it very nicely, and actually there's a aspect of the 2.5 hour version of this that I like because it is messy, and I kind of like that. But I mean, I couldn't resist going in and giving it a little extra love and like cleaning some of it up as well. Okay, so now we're working on her teeth. We did her teeth and her lips, and now we're moving into her eyes. Now her hair. Just going super fast. I mean, it's basically just implied. It's not really, there's not a lot of structure to that. We just did the part of her dress that isn't the frilly part, and now we're doing the frilly part. And now we just cleaned up some of that, and we're moving on to the hand, trying to get the hand to have some proper definition, even though I just threw it in there super fast. Those fingernails, you can tell, are basically just a stroke of brown paint. Like they have no craft to them, basically. And now we're putting in the shadow. So the shadow, since he's backlit by the moon, is super easy. I designed it that way on purpose. That kind of lighting not only gets us some drama, but it's also simple. You have far less that you have to solve if the figure is mostly in shadow. So I'm doing some artificial things here where I'm carving out spots where the light hits so that we can get definition there, but a majority of the way this whole thing is lit is just in shadow. And then I go in and I just add some little tweaks here or there to make sure that my definition is all coming through. I wanted her to be a little bit better lit than she would have been. I would imagine that the moon wouldn't illuminate her face quite as well, but since she's the victim and there's a lot of stylization in her, I kind of wanted her to still shine to a certain degree. I think that she has just as much visual interest as he does, so I wanted to make sure that the moon was still showing her, basically. See, again, here we go. The shadow makes it super nice and easy. We just fill all that hair in. None of that hair would get hit by the light, so let's just blot it all in there. Same thing with this hand. Now we're leaving, again, similar to her face, we're leaving some aspects of the hand open to the light just so that we can, from a design perspective, we can get that hand lit. Here I just duplicated the moon, selected Dracula, deleted from the moon, and then blurred it so that we could get that light encroaching. Now with an add layer and a slight orange, bright orange, I'm adding that subsurface scattering into his ears so that we can really sell that moonlight coming through the ear there. Here's a hard rim light on everything. We just want to, again, sell the drama. We want to get that bounce from that moon really, really crisp. Even though it's super graphic and maybe not the most realistic look for it, like we want it nonetheless. Then added some bounce light from some blue light that's happening basically kind of from our vantage point so that we can get a little bit more definition in Dracula and other things. Now here's where I had forgotten the wounds to the neck and the blood, so I'm just throwing that blood in to make sure that we got the point of the image basically done here. Here's me turning on and off a bunch of stuff and just tweaking some things. And here's the final version of what I actually did at Sketchbomb. I think that this is pretty successful, especially for being just 2.5 hours. We've got some drama, we've got some interesting design happening in the characters. We have a fairly dynamic pose for what we're going for, and I just mean in the sense that like his hand is splayed open in an interesting way, and he's got kind of a nice tilt to his head, and he's noticing you and looking over. I think she has a nice design for just being sort of like a falling unconscious person in the scene. I think she looks pretty good. But now I leave Sketchbomb, I go home, put the kids to bed, and I've got some time to like watch TV. Let's throw another hour at this. So we start by kind of shifting some color around. You can see that that shadow very quickly went cool, and then we turn everything off because the core of this has to be in the flats. I'm going to try my best to notice which part of the flats I am tweaking at any given time, but the gist of what's going to be happening here is me going through all of the flat layers and saying, like, is this as messy as I'm okay with, or should it be cleaned up? And you can see, of course, the hand is the first thing that gets really seriously cleaned up, getting all those nails figured out. Of course, as I'm changing these flats, that means I'm also going to have to address changes in the AO pass. Probably less the direct shadow, because it's this big block of shadow. It's almost like a colorized version of a Mignola shadow. It's just like filling the entire thing. But anyways, we're going in right now, though, and we're not worrying about the work that has to be done with the AO. We're just making sure that we clean all this stuff up. So I add an extra strand of hair that's coming between his two fingers right there from her head, which means that that is on top, which is actually an easy fix, because since it's on top, we can just select it, clear it from the AO layer, and then paint in the AO. Like it's since it's on top, it's not too destructive, basically. Some little eye changes, some mouth changes, just really subtle things happening here. At this point, when I'm actually working on it, I've got it pretty zoomed in, and I'm just kind of panning through and saying, like, should that be tweaked? Should that be tweaked? What needs to be changed to get it where it needs to be? You can see that on his cravat, there's a bunch of messiness there, so I'll jump over there really quick and smooth that out a little bit. Any second now. There we go. And I'm looking at just other things, and that's why these are really small. So you can right there, you can see I added a little bit of extra hair coming down, clean up the teeth a little bit, flicking things on and off. Now I've turned all my layers back on, and now I just have the AO layer on, and I'm tweaking the AO layer. Since I went through and I changed a bunch of things structurally, I now have to just clean that up. And the good news is that was done pretty roughly anyhow, so I have an interest in kind of sweeping across the entire piece and cleaning up the AO just in general. Here we're adding some extra darkness just below his ear, and then now I realized that to get some of this extra depth in his hair, I want another shadow layer that is the same color as a separate, just completely separate thing set to multiply above the hair layer. So that's going to add that extra curve of the hair coming back around and forward. We had a little bit of wrinkle in his nose, like he's got just a little bit more of that nose crinkle thing happening. And then we'll move down. I think at this point we're going to be working on like her body and smoothing some of that out and just getting it to look nicer. This is just in general a big, let's make it look a little nicer pass. Obviously I'm still using the turpentine brush across the entire thing, so making things look still painterly and messy a little bit is just a part of it. That's going to happen kind of no matter what, unless I'm putting a lot of effort into basically moving away from what I'm using that brush from using that brush for in the first place. Now we turn that direct shadow back on and start working on that. You can see based on where it ended before, I had a very warm shadow and now I've switched to a very cool shadow. That was more just a byproduct of thinking about it more and thinking about how I want it to be as an image than it was really a this was wrong and now this was right. It was more about just my own personal preference. You can see on her face now, I'm adding a lot more subtlety with the way the shadows are cast. I softened the way it looks like on her lips and on her chin and on her cheek. I'm going in and putting a much more deliberate shadow now for her nose. And I'll just be doing that as a general pass with this. Of course, still taking some liberties with the way that I'm interpreting that moonlight. We've got that shaft of light that's sort of illuminating her neck and her shoulder. Now we're going to put in the hot transition from the shadow to the skin. And then I put an extra shadow under his nose to sell the geometry of his nose. Put a little bit of extra shine on his eyelid to do the same for the eyelid. And then I put that little glow in his eye, like his eye is almost like a jewel. It's kind of a weird way to hint at the fact that maybe he's nocturnal because his eye is doing something weird with the light. I don't know. It's kind of bullshittery, but it still sells what you're going for. I make the reflection of the moon very prominent in her eyes. It's not exact. I'm still trying to make sure that I'm not putting too much work into this piece because I didn't want to take like 2.5 hours at Sketch Bomb and then like 5 hours afterwards to make all these details accurate. I still wanted it to feel painterly to some degree. Obviously it's cleaned up, but you know, a little bit. So we're getting that rim light back in there, duplicating the rim light and blurring it so that we can get that bloom, and then turning the blue bounce light back on and just playing with that to make sure it is the way we want it as well. We will also add in lines. So I did this piece after I did the Frankenstein piece, and so after I got this home and did all this extra work on it, I was like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to pull it into the same direction as the Frankenstein piece just to make them feel somewhat related. And so that's what I do here. I go in with lines, and I mean, I almost always put this dark line for like eyelashes so that we can bring attention to the eyes, but then you can see here I'm also playing with the lines actually in the figure. You saw me adjust them quite a bit. That was just me trying to figure out what the vibe was for the lines that I was going with here. We put it into his face, we put it here into his hand, we do a little bit on her, and we added in just sort of where it seems to make the most sense. Where do we want to draw attention? Where do we want to have a little bit more separation and a little style brought in as well? Now, this is where we shift the whole color temperature of the image back over to warm. I actually showed it to a couple of people, like my wife and some friends from work, and I said, which one is better, the cool one or the warm one? And even though everybody sort of acknowledged that, like, yeah, the cool one makes sense in a lot of ways, the warm one had an interesting vibe to it. So we went and we shifted everything back over warm, and then just started double checking all of our elements and making sure that that all works together. You can see there also with the rim light, something I like doing is throwing in a couple of stray hairs that breaks the form of what you have with the flats. If you do that with the rim light, it just looks like it's a lit strand of hair, and it looks quite nice. That was me just playing with a bunch of things. Here I'm using some red light to separate Dracula a little bit from his victim. And these are all just textures and things flashing on and off, and it'll all end now. So this is the final version of the piece. This was after a 5-minute sketch, 2.5 hours at Sketch Bomb, and then an extra hour thrown in at home with a little bit of indecision as part of that hour, I guess. So I hope you enjoyed exactly where it ended up. I'm happy with it, especially given all the constraints. So here's where it was before the tweaks. This is the way it was at the end of Sketch Bomb, and then here is how it was after the extra bit of time. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. YouTube is getting really hard to navigate, like algorithm wise, so if you like it or you comment, that actually helps surface it for other people. Appreciate all the help I can get. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places you can find me.